Hello, good morning and good afternoon to everyone, and thank you for joining Intertech for the safety requirements for children's clothing sold in Europe. My name is Rainy. I am the marketing executive of Intertech's global softline and hardlines. So right before we begin today's presentation, I would like to quickly go over some housekeeping items. Please keep in mind that all attendees, aside from the presenters, will have their lines automatically muted. So if you have questions during the webinar, please type them into the question pane on your control panel. We will address your questions during the Q&A session. For those of you who raised questions when filling out the registration forms, don't worry, we will address your questions during the presentations. Please note that today's webinar will be recorded. After the webinar, you will receive the PDF of the slides and a link to the recording on email. Our presenter today will be Dave Smith, the Technical Support Manager of Intertech's Global Softlines, who has over 20 years of experience in the industry. Without further ado, I'd like to pass it over to Dave to begin.
Okay, thank you, Rainy, for the introduction, and welcome everybody to today's webinar, which is safety requirements for children's clothing sold in Europe. So the agenda for this morning or this afternoon's webinar will be, as you see on screen. So we're going to look at some SEN definitions first, because some of the slides we are talking about relate to technical specifications or technical reports or EN standards, so it's important to know the differences. We'll be looking at mechanical safety, which is TR 16792, the new security of attachment specifications and test methods, EN 14682, which is cords and drawstrings, flammability of children's clothing, and also REACH. So first we'll look at some SEN definitions. So first we have EN, which is a European standard or European norm. So leading to full implementation as a national standard, it's European wide, which may also serve the European regulatory purpose of the new approach. SEN, which is the European Committee for Standardization, or CEN, which is Committee European Denormalization. A technical specification, which is known as SEN-TS. These serve as a normative document in areas where the actual state of the art is not sufficiently stable for a European standard. And then a technical report, so SEN-TR. So these are normally for information or a transfer of knowledge, so people are aware of certain requirements or recommendations. So a European standard, known as an EN, is a normative document published in 3 official languages: English, French, and German. It includes a public inquiry accompanied by a weighted vote, a formal vote, and then a final ratification. Once an EN is published, any conflicting national standards are withdrawn or should be withdrawn. The content of an EN should never conflict with any other EN standard, and they are periodically reviewed. The values that EN derives from the characteristics of its development process are a consensus, openness, transparency, national commitment, and technical coherence. A technical specification, known as a TS, again, it's a normative document published in 3 official languages, English, French, and German, established and approved by CEN technical committees by a weighted vote of CEN members. It's made available at national level, but national standards may continue to exist, so it doesn't automatically replace. A TS, though, must not conflict with any EN and will be withdrawn if a conflicting EN is published. TSs are created to address a market need where there is no immediate need for national implementation. TSs can also act as a pre-standard that finally become an EN. They are normally established if an EN is not yet feasible. They provide guidance on specifications and test methods. They provide specifications in experimental or evolving technologies. Or they are sometimes created if there is insufficient support at the CEN inquiry to progress to an EN. Or if there's a lack of consensus on the work item to formal vote in the given time frame. A technical report, known as a TR, again, it's an official normative document published in 3 official languages, English, French, and German. These are established and approved by a CEN technical committee or board by a majority vote by CEN members. They may conflict with national standards, and adoption of a TR is optional. They provide information on the technical content of the standardization work, provides information in cases considered urgent or advisable. They can include data from CEN members or other organizations or outside bodies on a particular subject. There's no time limit on a TR, but like all the ENs or TSs, they should be periodically reviewed. So there's a bit of background on TS, TR, and ENs and why they are created. So firstly, we're going to look at PD CEN TR 16792, which is the European guidance on mechanical safety. So as it currently stands, this standard is under revision, as are quite a lot of children's safety related standards. This standard gives recommendations for the design and manufacture for safe children's clothing in relation to mechanical hazards. So it doesn't address chemical and it doesn't address thermal hazards. It just addresses mechanical hazards. It's applicable to pretty much all children's clothing, including bonnets, hats, scarves, socks, and other clothing accessories, which are intended for children up to the age of 14. There are certain articles they are not applicable to, such as bibs, nappies, soothers, and holders. So these are what's known as childcare articles, footwear, and toys. These are covered by other standards or specifications. Dressing up clothes or disguise costumes should also meet the recommendations in the technical report, as well as EN 71 or the Toy Safety Directive. So the first clause, clause 3, looks at terms and definitions. So I'm just going to outline some key definitions that you need to be aware of. So the definition of a baby is a child from birth up to the age of 12 months, and also a height requirement up to and including 80 centimetres. An infant is classed as a child from 12 months up to and including 36 months. And again, we have this height requirement of children over 80 centimetres up to and including 98 centimetres. Child and young person, defined as a person over 36 months and up to 14 years. And again, we have these height requirements and they are different for girls and boys. So for girls, it's from 98 to 176 centimetres, and from boys, it's from 98 to 182 centimetres. The reason we have the height requirements is obviously because children from different member states, countries, tend to be different heights. So clause 4 looks at mechanical hazards and the associated risks, and it gives lots of information on hazards and risk. There are quite specific details given on some key mechanical hazards such as ischemic injuries, which is the restriction of blood, entrapment in components such as slide fasteners, injuries from sharp objects, choking and aspiration, swallowing, magnets, strangulation and entrapment, slipping, tripping, falling, restriction of vision and hearing, and suffocation. Clause 5 looks at risk assessment. It gives the user an understanding of the stages of risk assessment, including suggestions on how to remove or minimise identified risks. Recommendations are provided on when and how risk assessment should be done, and also considerations and the importance of understanding things as the age of the child, especially children under 7, because they are quite unpredictable and they don't appreciate or identify risk like an older child would. The level of supervision that a child should be having, behaviour, weight and height. So all things that should be considered whilst doing risk assessments. Risk assessments should always be documented, dated and signed by a authorised person within the company, someone who has lots of experience. Wearer trials should never be used as part of a risk assessment. If a hazard became evident during a wearer trial, it should be immediately stopped. So clause 6 looks at materials, construction and design of the garment. The designs and sizing should always be based on anthropometric data from children in the relevant age group. Aftercare process should be considered in relation to the performance of the materials and components. So if something deteriorates after it's been washed, this should be highlighted and addressed. The designer should provide full product specifications, including descriptions, age, usage, materials and components, and any process such as garment washing. Materials should be selected so that they don't present any kind of mechanical risks, and they should also be strong enough to support any components that are sewn or attached to them. Filling materials should contain no foreign or sharp objects. And sewing thread. No monofilament sewing thread should be used on the inside of garments, although some brands and retailers decide to not use monofilaments at all. And any trim threads should be less than 10 millimeters. So, small parts, which can be choking hazards, are described as non-textile parts which become detached from a child's garment. And these can be whole components or they can be pieces of components if they break. And a small part is defined as one which can fit inside this diagram of this cylinder here. So this is the choking tube. And if it can fit in its entirety into the cylinder without any kind of compression or force, it's defined as a small part and could be a choking hazard. It's the same cylinder that's used in toys as well. So, attached components, which is under clause 6, only deals with components that are attached to children's garments under 36 months, so up to 3 years. It recommends lock stitches used where possible. It doesn't recommend hand stitch for under 36 months. And it defines that a non-textile component is classed as a small part, which is tested for security of attachment, which can be a pull test or a durability wash. Textile components, classed as small parts, are tested for a durability wash. So they're not actually pull tested, they are wash tested using the DuraWash method. The components mustn't have any sharp edges or points. And the requirements in this clause relating to the security of attachments have now been superseded by the new specifications and methods which we'll be talking about shortly. Clause 7 deals with the manufacture. So things that are used in the process to make the garments, some things like sharp objects, they should be, they can cause injury. You need to eliminate the use of pins and staples. Sewing needles and scissors, they should have correct, proper control systems to document all elements of the use of such items. Metal detection procedures in place and possibly at different stages of the manufacture, including after packaging, where possible, of course. Machine applied fasteners, like poppers, it's vital to ensure that they are suitable for the fabric being used and the correct pinch settings apply for the substrate. Regular inspections and QC checks, and documentation for the safety practices and procedures kept on file for traceability. Clause 8 and 9 looks at packaging and security tagging. And again, no pins or staples should be used. Security tags, if used, should be controlled to ensure that pins are not left in clothing. Hanger loops, they should not protrude outside the garment and should be made so that they are easily detached when pulled. And sufficient warnings should be provided to ensure they are removed prior to use. And any labels should be risk assessed. So, as I touched upon a few slides ago, there's an update for the security of attachment. So as of this year, end of last year, there was 4 new documents published by SEN. One was published in the back end of last year and 3 early this year. But these are the 17394 series of documents. So we have SEN-TS 17394 Part 1, which is the specification, which contains the requirements for security of attachment. EN 17394 Part 2, which is for buttons and tack buttons and toggle buttons. SEN-TS 17394 Part 3, which is for metal mechanically applied press fasteners. And SEN-TS 17394 Part 4, which is for components except buttons and mechanically applied press fasteners. So basically everything else. So you'll notice that we have 1 EN and 3 SEN-TSs. The reason for that was a number of factors really, but essentially due to the lack of interlaboratory trials for Part 3 and Part 4, which were all kind of delayed due to COVID and other issues. They couldn't be issued as ENs, so they had to be issued as TSs, a technical specification. And because those 2 were issued as TSs, then the specification, Part 1, also had to be a TS. That's not to say they will remain TSs, and once the interlaboratory trials have been completed, they will more than likely be turned into ENs. On the right hand side, you can see the requirements. So for Parts 2 and Parts 3, which is for buttons and press fasteners, metal press fasteners, you can see that the requirements relate to the size of the component. So anything that's 6 millimeters and above is 70 newtons. Anything that's between 3 and 6 is 50 newtons. And then Part 4, which covers essentially anything that isn't a button or a metal press fastener, is a durability wash. And the requirement is that the components shall not be detached. And the DuraWash cycle is a very severe cycle. So if it survives that, then that is deemed to be safe, as long as it's not detached. So that was mechanical safety. And then we'll move on to EN 14682 for cords and drawstrings. So just like 16792, this standard is also under revision currently. Possibly both standards or specifications will be revised and published this year. So the aim of this standard is to reduce the risk of accidental entrapment and strangulation by cords and drawstrings. And again, it takes into account age and behaviour, level of supervision. The requirements within the documents are applicable to both the inside and the outside. But if a risk assessment shows that any features that are on the inside do not create a hazard, then that is fine. But the risk assessment should show that. So a bit of background on EN 14682. It's a relatively new document in terms of standards. It was developed under an EU mandate and was first published in 2004. It was then harmonised 2 years later in 2006, and then revised and harmonised again in 2007. A further revision was published in 2014, which was then harmonised in 2015. And although it is a voluntary standard. It is definitely required under Article 4 of the General Product Safety Directive. And children's clothing that meets this standard, 14682, is considered to be safe and also to meet the requirements of the General Product Safety Directive. So as you can see, it's been published and revised a number of times in the last 16, 17 years. And that's because design changes, so the standard has to change. So it's applicable to all children's clothing up to the age of 14 years, and the same height requirements that are in 16792 also apply here. It also applies to disguise costumes, dress up, and also ski wear. The requirements cover the length or the placement of cords, drawstrings, zips, loops, shoulder straps, adjusting tabs, sashes, tied belts, and belt loops. And guidance is also included regarding risk assessment. So we have the age and the height definitions, which are similar to 16792. The age is split into two categories, which is different to 16792, but for 14682, the age is basically from birth up to the age of 7. So that's for a young child, and that is up to and including 6 years and 11 months. And again, we have this height requirement of 134 centimeters. An older child and young person is from 7 years up to the age of 14. So that's 13 years, 11 months. And again, we have these height requirements. The requirements within the standard vary for the age of the child and also the position of the item on the actual body. So, as it currently stands, the standard has 4 distinct zones. Zone A, which covers the head, the neck, and the upper chest area. Zone B, which is the chest and the waist area. Zone C, which is below the hip. Zone D, which is the back area. Another area that isn't covered in the zones here is the arms or sleeves. They are covered. There are requirements in the standard. However, they are not defined as a zone. The revised EN 14682 will have an additional zone E, which will cover the arms. So there are some general requirements and there are some very specific requirements. So as a kind of overview and looking at the key requirements for 14682, functional cords, drawstrings, belts, and sashes. You are not allowed to have knots or 3D embellishments on the ends or along the length of the 3 ends. The 3 ends must be secured to prevent fraying without creating an entrapment hazard. Toggles can only be used on decorative cords or on a drawstring that does not have free end. Zip pullers shall not be longer than 7.5 centimeter, and that includes any embellishments on the zip puller, any tag. And they shall not hang below the lower edge of the garment that's designed to finish at the ankle. So if we look at young children, which is up to the age of 7, and we look at zone A, which is the head, neck and upper chest, drawstrings and functional cards are not allowed. Decorative cards are allowed, but a maximum of 7.5 centimeters, but they are not allowed on the hood or the back of the neck, and they shall not have any 3D embellishments on them, and also they shall not tie across the throat. Decorative cards shall not be made from elastic. The hazard here is what's called snapback. So they can be pulled and allowed to snap back into the face. So they are not allowed to be made from elastic. Adjusting tabs in this area are allowed, but we have a 7.5 centimeter maximum requirement and no 3D embellishments. So very clear. Then for older children, in the same zone, so zone A, drawstrings are allowed, but they shall not have any free ends. If drawstrings are used, then you can't have any protruding loop when the opening is open to its largest size, and when closed to its smallest size, the loop circumference cannot be any more than 15 centimeters. Toggles, if they are used on the drawstrings, they must be fixed to the garment. So as well as them being on the drawstring, they must be fixed to the garment. Functional and decorative cards are with a maximum requirement of 7.5 centimeters, and they must not be made from elastic. And then if we move down the body, we're looking at garments worn from the waist down, and this is for all ages. So drawstrings in the waist, the maximum requirement of 20 centimeters, and this is measured with the waist relaxed. So you don't stretch out the waist, you allow it to be relaxed and then measured. If drawstrings are used and they have no free ends, there shall be no loop. So there's no loops allowed on the drawstrings with no free ends. And this is measured with the waist open to its largest size. So 2 different types of measurement. Functional cards are allowed 20 centimeter maximum. Decorative cards and adjusting tabs 14 centimeter maximum. So young children, when we're talking about tied belts and sashes, so tied belts are allowed and sashes are allowed, and the maximum allowable length is 36 centimeters. Now this is measured when untied and from the point in which they are to be tied, and that's whether at the front, the back or the side. When tied at the back, they shall not hang below the hem of the garment. And then for older children, for tied belts and sashes, they are allowed. And again, we have this 36 centimeter maximum when untied and measured from the point they are to be tied. So you pull the 2 ties together. You don't actually tie them. You just pull them together to the point where they are to be tied, and then you take the measurement. So lower edge of garments that hang below the crotch, drawstrings, functional cords, or decorative cords, they shall not hang below the lower edge of the garment, and this includes any toggle. They must lie flat when tightened or fastened, and if the garment finishes at the ankle, they must be on the inside. In the back area, this relates to all ages. You are not allowed to have any drawstrings or functional cords that emerge or are tied at the back. So you can have belts and you can have sashes that tie at the back, but not drawstrings or functional cords. Decorative cords are allowed, but no more than 7.5 centimeters, and you are not allowed to have any 3D embellishments, knots or toggles. Tied belts and sashes are allowed as long as they meet the requirements from the belts clause. So that was EN 14682. I didn't cover every single requirement because there's quite a lot to cover in a short time. So there are more requirements, more in-depth requirements. So moving on to flammability. So first of all, we'll look at the UK and the UK nightwear flammability regulations. So these were introduced in 1985 and they came into effect in 1987, and they replaced the original night dress regulations from the 1960s. But essentially, nightwear can burn rapidly if accidentally set alight by contact with an open fire or electric fire or gas flame or other heat source, and they can cause serious, if not fatal, injury, especially to children and elderly people. So consequently, various voluntary and mandatory measures have been taken to reduce the risk and raise awareness. So, who is affected by the UK nightwear regulations? So all persons who supply nightwear and garments used for similar purposes, which can be the manufacturer, it can be the importers, it can be the wholesalers, and also the retailers. So there are some exemptions. The regulations do not apply to second-hand nightwear or nightwear that is intended for export. So we'll go over the main requirements, the key requirements. So essentially, it's an offence to supply nightwear that does not meet the regulations. Children's nightwear, which means garments for children over 3 months and under 13 years. So that's the definition of children's nightwear. There are also certain measurements which apply, the length and the chest measurement. Night dresses, dressing gowns, and other similarly worn garments worn as nightwear must conform to the flammability performance requirements of BS 5722. Pyjamas, cotton terry towel in bathrobes do not have to comply with the flammability performance of BS 5722, but they must carry a label, a permanent label, to show if they demonstrate compliance with the regulations or not. Babies' garments, so this is all babies' garments under 3 months, must also carry a permanent label to demonstrate if it does or does not meet. So certain garments have to comply with the flammability performance, and some garments don't, they just need to be labelled. So some things to note: one-piece garments with legs are treated as pajamas. So these could be like baby rompers and baby suits. So one-piece garments with legs are treated as pajamas. Garments with stretch that could be worn by a child over 3 months should be treated as nightwear. Garments with a dual purpose, such as a sleeping bag that doubles as a dressing gown, should also be treated as nightwear. And then, when considering the testing, the whole garment, including threads, trimmings, and decorations, should be tested. So ideally, finished products should be tested. So labelling. So nightwear that does not meet the flammability performance requirements must carry a label with the words "keep away from fire." So that's probably a label or a warning that you've seen quite a lot. Nightwear which meets the flammability performance requirements must carry a label with one of the following forms of words. So it can either say low flammability to BS 5722 in black letters, or it can say low flammability to BS 5722 and keep away from fire, or it can just simply say keep away from fire. So there's 3 options for you to consider. Most retailers and brands tend to just use the 3rd option, keep away from fire. But either of those can be used if it complies. So when it comes to the positioning of the label, labels must be permanent and securely sewn into the garment. They must not be obscured by any other label. They can be on a separate label on inside neck or on any label with the size details, but they must be below the size or on a label immediately beside the side label. The words must be durable, and if you are supplying pajamas, it's recommended that the jacket at least is labelled. So there are penalties. So failing to comply with the nightwear flammability regulations is an offence. The maximum penalty is a fine and 2 years imprisonment, and the court may also forfeit any or all of your goods, unsafe goods. Also need to consider that if a product causes personal injury or damage to a property, the supplier could also be liable to pay those damages as well. And additionally, if new products on sale are found to be in breach of the legislation, the manufacturer or importer will be required to recall all the infected products. So that's for the UK. So for Europe, there is BSEN 14878, which is the flammability of children's nightwear. It's a voluntary, non-harmonized standard, which was published in 2009. Again, this was developed under an EU mandate to address a number of fire-related incidents that related to nightwear worn by children. Again, this is required under Article 4 of the General Product Safety Directive. Children's nightwear that doesn't meet this standard would not be deemed safe, it would be deemed unsafe. And also, due to the UK nightwear regulations, which pre-existed 14878, they contain some requirements that are more severe than 14878, so it includes an A deviation. So there's like a disclaimer at the front relating to the UK nightwear regulations.
Hi everyone, hi Dave.
Hello.
Hi. Yeah, just a reminder, I think we have to speed up a bit because we have like a long list of questions waiting to be answered.
Okay, sure, yeah.
Yeah, thanks.
So the application and the scope. So it covers all children's nightwear, including pajamas, night dresses, bathrobes, dressing gowns, and other similar worn nightwear. It has 3 classifications: Class A, Class B, and Class C. So it has all nightwear, Class A, pajamas, Class B, and baby garments is up to 6 months. And it gives design guidance for nightwear garments. So there's no mandatory labelling recommendations. However, if the garment is to be labelled, it shall contain the following words. So again, we have this warning: keep away from fire. The fabric class A, B, or C as appropriate, and the EN 14878. And then for children's daywear, there are some member states that have additional requirements for daywear, although not a European-wide requirement. 3 particular countries, Netherlands, Sweden, and Norway, both have requirements for children's daywear in terms of the ASTM D1230, which is a bit like the American 16 CFR 1610 test. And then finally, we'll look at REACH, CMR. So CMR means carcinogenic, mutagenic, reproductive. So REACH stands for Registration, Evaluation, Authorization of Chemicals. It applies directly to all member states. It incorporated lots of existing directives and put them all under one kind of umbrella. And it provides a framework so that consumers can be informed about the risks of chemicals. So we have the authorization list, Annex 17, and basically it says substances listed on the authorization list will not be allowed to be used, placed on the market, or imported into the EU after a date to be set, unless the company is granted an authorization. And currently there are 72 entries on the restricted substance list. So I'm sure you've heard of SVHCs. So these are substances of very high concern. There are currently 211 SVHCs on the list, and there are certain implications, obligations if you are importing more than a ton or more a year into the EU. There's also a information request. So if a consumer makes a request about SVHCs in an article, the supplier or the retailer of that article must provide the information free of charge within 45 days. There's also a new addition from January this year that article suppliers must notify substances of very high concern in their articles to ECHA's SVIP database under the Waste Framework Directive. So here are some key substances that are in apparel products that are restricted by legislation. Azo dyes, nickel phthalates, cadmium. We have perfluorooctane, sulfonate, dimethyl fumarate, organotins, lead, NPOs, chromium-6, short-chain chlorinated paraffins, PAHs, formaldehyde, and then the new CMR substances. So the CMR regulation, which is quite new really, covers clothing and related accessories. It covers textiles other than clothing, which can be under normal or reasonably foreseeable condition of use, come into contact with human skin, and also footwear. These are the applicable product groups. So we have the usual things like tops, t-shirts, underwear, nightwear, socks, watch straps, ties, scarves, and then things like bed linen, blankets, upholstery, cushion covers, and obviously footwear. There are certain exemptions from the CMR regulation, as you can see on the screen here. So basically non-textile fasteners, second-hand clothing, wall-to-wall carpets, PPE, medical devices, disposable textiles, curtains. So certain exemptions from the CMR. And then we have the substance list. So there are basically 33 substances that have been identified from 10 different classes. So these are the classes: metals, amines, carcinogenics, formaldehyde, benzene, quinoline, chlorinated aromatic hydrocarbons, phthalates, solvents, and polyaromatic hydrocarbons. And then here are the requirements. So I've listed them out into the categories. So formaldehyde, 75, and so on. You can see on screen there. So basically a summary on CMR: 33 chemicals listed or restricted. It relates to clothing and related accessories or textiles which come in contact with the skin. And all these were effective from the 1st of November 2020. Okay, so we have some questions. So we have a question: how often is European standards reviewed? Normally, European standards are reviewed periodically, 4 to 5 years, but it all depends on demand. So the safety ones are reviewed quite often and can be revised even quicker than that if there is a market need to revise that particular standard. Can we check if a standard is mandatory or voluntary? Well, it all depends on the regulation or the legislation. So if it's called up in a certain regulation, yes, or to show compliance, you follow the more state-of-the-art document. Some are mandatory and some are voluntary. Stirrups. Are removable stirrups permissible and can they be adjustable? Stirrups are allowed. There's no guidance to say whether they can be adjustable, but they are allowed. It would all possibly depend on how they can be adjusted and how long any adjusting straps are. Ideally, stirrups should be fixed. Are pom-poms considered textile attachments? Yes, they are. Each pom-pom would have to be assessed. The larger pom-poms, if it doesn't fit inside the choking tube, there is no real need to test it as such, because it wouldn't be a choking hazard. If it did fit inside the choking tube, then yes, it could be classed as a small part, and yes, it should be tested, but only for a durability wash. However, it could be a particular retailer's wish to actually pull them off instead of actually using the durability wash method. Okay, so what are examples for textile parts that need to pass the attachment strength? Well, and also what is defined as a method of duro wash. So the new standards define 3 methods. One is for mechanically metal attached press fasteners. One is for buttons, and the other is for anything else that is deemed a small part. So technically, textiles attachments aren't really deemed a choking hazard as such. They should be risk assessed. If it is like a pom-pom, like the answer before, if it's like a pom-pom, then yes, possibly it would be classed as a small part if it fits inside the tube or not. But essentially, each component needs to be assessed, but it would be a durability wash. Now, the durability wash is the top loading old like twin tub type machine, which is available still in some countries. It is a very severe wash. The machine is defined quite clearly in the standard. Sharp points and edges to all stiff components attached to a garment need to be tested for this, or only ones with potential sharp points or edges. Well, 16792 doesn't have any specific requirements like the US test methods do. It just says no sharp edges or points. So again, during the risk assessment, all components should be assessed. There's nothing stopping brands and retailers from using the American sharp points, sharp edges test methods or techniques to assess them. But essentially, yeah, anything that has a sharp point should be assessed. When will 16792 be revised and published? Hopefully this year. But as with all standards, things can sometimes take time, but hopefully this year. New updates, put responsibility of brand and manufacturing due to lab challenges due to COVID. Not sure I understand that question. The DuraWash, again, going back to the DuraWash method, it is a defined test method. It's 17394 part 4, and it's clearly outlined. It's the same method that was in 16792. It's the same method that was in BS 7907. The method hasn't changed at all. Is there a difference between EN 71 and mechanical safety? Yes, there is a major difference between the security of attachment of children's clothing and EN 71 part 1. Children's clothing security of attachment is tested to destruction. So the item is pulled until it is detached. EN 71 is a hold method. So it is taken to a specified test load and held for 10 seconds. So it is a different method. How are textile elements such as knots, ears on hoods tested? Do they have to comply? Again, only if the textile element is classed as a small part. If it isn't classed as a small part, then technically, according to the new European standards, it doesn't need to be tested. But it may be a retailer requirement to actually do a pull test on them. Children's garments care label is dry clean only, and not hand or machine wash. Well, even though a garment care label may state dry clean only, the security of attachment method described in 17394 part 4 isn't a appearance test. So even if a garment does say dry clean only, it should still be put through the 17394 part 4 method to determine if it's detached or not, because it is a detachment test, not a appearance test.
So for the next question, which is from Laura, her question should be referring to page 30 of the slides. So I've marked it down.
Okay.
In case, yeah.
So we do have some questions that have kind of been answered already. Do you have translation in Cambodian? No, sorry.
Oh no, actually the question from Laura haven't been answered yet. I just marked it down for your reference. It's still for you to answer.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
So Laura's question is, are those the current requirements? Yes, anything I've discussed today are current requirements. Are stirrups removable? Can stirrups be removable? Yes, there's nothing saying that stirrups can't be removable, so that's okay. Can the full requirements be included in the documents? I've given you an overview today of children's requirements. Essentially, full requirements, if you are in need of them, they can be purchased from the relevant national standards body. Regulation regarding sewing thread. Why are monofilament not allowed on inside? So this is because monofilament sewing thread is extremely strong and it can cause an ischemic injury. So little fingers and little toes for children, when they are putting garments on, or if they get their hands inside the garments, the little fingers and little toes can get trapped and inside the monofilaments, and cause a ischemic injury. It's more, the requirement is more for the inside, because sometimes the parents or guardian may not know if the child is in, or why the child is in distress, if they've got a certain part trapped in the monofilament. If it's trapped on the outside of the garment, it's more than likely going to be seen. Regarding monofilament thread, we have sequin designs on Christmas styles. We tend not to use monofilament at all. However, would it be okay to use monofilament on the outer side? Well, yeah. The requirements quite clearly state that monofilament should not be used on the inside. There's nothing saying you can't use it on the outside, but it is kind of, some retailers do tend not to use monofilament at all in children's clothing, but it can be used on the outside. What are functional cards? So a functional card is a strip of material that is used to provide closure or to fasten the garment. There's a difference between a functional card and a decorative card. Obviously, a decorative card has no function. A functional card provides closure or fastens part of the garment. It's different to a drawstring in the fact that a drawstring comes through a channel and a functional card doesn't. Regarding flam regs, you mentioned stretch being included. Would leggings be an example? The guidance just says garments that can stretch. So if you deem that garment could be worn by a child over the age of 3 months because it stretches, then yes, leggings would be an example if it's nightwear. Are back neck labels considered small components? If the labels are sewn by hand to the garment, is it allowed? It's textile. So if it's a textile attached component and it fits inside the choking tube fully without compression, then yes, it could be considered a small part. If it doesn't fit inside the tube, the cylinder, then it's not considered a small part. Should bodies for babies be considered as nightwear and tested for flammability? If it is under 3 months, then no, it's fine. If it's for over 3 months and it's nightwear, if it was the sole nightwear garment, then yes. For keep away for fire labeling, if I have size of the back neck, but also on the curl label inside the garment, do I need to have a calf label in both areas? The calf labeling really needs to be in the back neck of, I'm not sure what garment we're talking about here, so maybe if I knew that, I'd be able to answer it better. Age less than 3 years, zone C, decorative shoe cord lace. Age less than 3 years, decorative shoe cord lace. I'm not sure I understand that question, sorry. However, textile elements such as knots, ears, hoods tested. Do they have to comply? Again, textile elements attached to children's clothing all depends on the size and whether or not it fits inside the choking tube. Should kids' hats, gloves follow these regulations? When it comes to 16792, yes. 14682, no, they are exempt from 14682. Does daywear that contains stretch need to be tested for flammability? Both the UK and the European standards relate to nightwear, not daywear. The attachment strength testing, does this need to be performed according to one specific method, or can we use a different pulling method, example, American method? There's no requirement to show testing like there is in America. You just need to be compliant. So as long as you're confident that the testing that you have performed is diligent and it conforms to the pull test requirements of whether it be 50 newtons or 70 newtons, it would be up to you how you address that risk. Did I understand correctly that ratification of SEN TS 17394? The TSs should eventually become ENs once the interlaboratory trials have been completed. Due to COVID and a number of other issues last year, the interlaboratory trials had to stop. Hopefully they will be started again, and then hopefully these TSs will become full ENs. I don't know whether that will be this year or whether that will be next year. Are dungarees classed as functional cords? Straps on dungarees, again, there are specific requirements. They are allowed, but there are requirements relating to the ends of them. I can contact you separately with specific requirements for this. Can you provide details for me for the substances from the 10 classes? So this is relating to the CMR regulation. Yes, we can. If you look on the Intertech website, all the substances from the 10 classes are listed in one of our insights. They're also freely available on ECHA's website as well. Again, another question about textile attached components. I think I've already answered that question. Is the formaldehyde standard different for babies, kids, and adults? No, it is the same requirements. However, it may be that some retailers or other kind of certifications might lower the requirements from 75 maybe down to something like 16 milligrams per kilogram, but essentially no, it's still 75. New SEN, which references buttons, we still follow BS for buttons for BS 4162. So BS 4162 does not relate to the security of attachment of buttons onto clothing. BS 4162 is a specification that deals with the button itself. So how strong is the button? So yes, you can still use BS 4162 for the actual impact or tension strength of the actual button, but the new SEN or the new EN standard for buttons relates to the security of attachment of the button onto the garment. For the hanger loop on jacket, conformity to EN 462, is it measured on the loop size? The loop, so if it's a hanger loop on a jacket, I assume this is going to be on the inside back neck. It is measured from, well, first of all, it needs to be assessed whether it's a fixed loop or whether it is a flat loop. So if this is a flat loop, it's measured from the stitch points, which means it's 7.5 centimeters. And if it is a fixed loop, which means it's a loop that stands proud of the actual jacket, it's 7.5 centimeters in circumference. Can a belt be attached permanently? Yes, it can. But you need to be careful if belts are attached permanently, because it all depends on the width of the belts. Sometimes the belts can therefore become draw cords, depending on the actual width. But yes, it can be attached, but different risk assessments need to be applied if the belt is being attached. Kids' hats, gloves and scarves, do they have to strictly follow mechanical requirements? They are not exempt from 16792. So any hazards identified on the products must be addressed and assessed using the guidance in 16792. Are there any exemption or restrictions in hood size for children's nightwear? There is a requirement or a recommendation in 16792 that babies' garments for sleepwear, so that's up to 12 months, should not have a hood. Again, it's something that you really shouldn't be doing for under 12 months because there's an overheating risk. There is no restrictions in hood size for over the age of 12 months. Again, these products should be risk assessed. Then you need to look at things like the air permeability to make sure that there's still a good breathing, there's no breathing resistance offered by the hood. We have a customer requesting LED lighting on some Christmas jumpers, but I couldn't find out something. Okay, so when it comes to this type of garment, we could definitely assist you. I will contact you separately if that's okay, Laura. Is it mandatory to use warning text, keep away from fire if product meet? It all depends on the actual product. So for items for garments which have to meet the UK safety regulations, the flammability regulations, actually no. So for night dresses and other garments which must comply with the nightwear regulations, it is not mandatory to label because they have to meet. Brexit, do we need to provide an address for UK as well as EU on the product care label? Yes, it's definitely advisable to put the UK address on the label. Again, 16792, hopefully will be revised and published this year.
Let me give you a help, Dave. So that's a
Okay.
question from Lindsay asking where can we buy a choking tube?
Choking tubes can be bought from a number of places. I'm not sure where our laboratory buys them from, but I can definitely find out. I can definitely contact Lindsay separately.
Okay. And next question is, can you please remind when technical document CNTR 16792 will be revised and published?
Again, I've already answered this question. Hopefully it will be this year.
Okay. And hello, Dave. Regarding to flammability test EN 14878, how to judge if the style belongs to nightwear or pajamas?
Quite simply, that pajamas are obviously pajamas, and if it isn't a pajama, it is nightwear.
Okay. Clothing with legs are to be considered as pajamas. To what age is this relevant? And is this just for styles you may sleep in or any styles with legs, for example, dungarees? So this is a question from Helen.
Clothing with legs are to be considered as PJs. So this is for nightwear. So if a one-piece garment has legs, it would be considered as pajamas and would be classed as nightwear. This is the flammability question, I think. So it's just for styles that you sleep in are deemed as nightwear, not for dungarees.
Okay. And next question is, will the durability test and pull test need to be done for hanging toys for babies made of textile?
Hanging top. This would be EN 71. This is not clothing related at all. So this will be Toy Safety Directive.
Okay. Is there a definition for 3D embellishments in regards to draw cords?
So anything that would be wider or thicker than the cord itself. So anything that's on the cord that is wider or thicker than the cord itself.
Okay. What about the ears mechanical requirements on a sweatshirt?
Again, so we're talking about textile attached components. So again, I think I've answered this question already.
Okay. Will textiles elements like ear/lugs and notes are covered by these norms? If yes, in which part?
Assuming we're still talking about security of attachment, again, it's anything that's textile isn't really classed as a small part, as a pull test. So it's all about the assessment of the actual product and does it fit inside the choking tube. If the textile element fits inside the choking tube, then yes, it's classed as a small part and a durability wash is performed, not a pull test.
Okay. Is it required to test lining in case of flammability testing? If yes, then pocket lining also needed? And is it required to test lining in case? Okay, so the entire question is it required to test lining in case of flammability testing?
Well, the regulations only apply to nightwear. So I very much doubt that there'll be many nightwear garments that have pocket linings. this seems to be more of a day wear question. So the answer is no, it's not required to test the pocket lining because
we lost you, Dave.
Nightwear doesn't tend to have pockets like blazers do. So I'm not 100% sure on Noah's question there.
Okay. Next question. What is the difference between TS and EN?
This is explained right at the very beginning of the presentation.
Okay. Yeah, just a reminder to all of you, a presentation will be shared with you, so you can refer back to the slides. And the next question is it mandatory to test all small parts according to the new test method or standard?
Yes.
All right. Next question. Does the hanger loops relate to door hanging loops?
It relates to any loops. So any loops that are on a garment, the requirements apply to.
Okay. Are the EN 16792 and EN 14682 applicable on the same garments?
Yes and no. So they both have exemptions. So 16792 pretty much covers most garments except things like childcare articles and shoes, the same as 14682. 14682 doesn't cover things like there's a full list of exemptions in the standard. So there are differences. So yes, they do cover the majority of the same garments, but there are specific exemptions in both standards.
Okay. And the next question is, will the questions and answers be summarized in written form for reference and better understanding? We will try our best to answer your questions here. And we will take your this feedback into consideration and see what we will figure out. Okay. And next question is, are there any updates on sequence size application, or is that the same as previous?
There's no update on sequence. Not that I'm aware of, anyway.
Okay. And a question from Andre. It's just the skin. So Andre, could you please elaborate your question? Okay, we'll move on to next question from Sarah. Are there specific requirements applicable to bibs or childcare articles if 13794 doesn't apply?
Childcare articles have separate safety standards. Things like bibs, if it's a textile bib and it has poppers on it, there's nothing to say you can't apply similar requirements that are in 17394. It would make sense to apply the security of attachment requirements that are listed in 17394.
Okay. And a question from Ravinda. If any button at bedside waist and strap need to be tied, is it okay?
I'm not sure I understand the question.
Okay, Ravinda, if you're hearing, could you please elaborate your question? And the next question is for the baby body flammability question. How would you define nightwear? We sell baby bodies through the regular main line, but of course parents could let babies sleep in this as babies sleep almost all day.
I will address that separately if you don't mind. I'll speak to Carla on that one.
Okay. And the next question is, if a thin breathable piece of textile can be put in the small part cylinder, does it considered to be a small part?
Well, technically, yes, it does. But again, it would just need a durability wash, really. It's not. It wouldn't be considered as much. It wouldn't really be considered a choking hazard as such, but it can be durability washed.
Next question from Amanda. Would you be allowed to put a small loop on the outside of a hood on a jacket?
There's nothing saying you can't have it. Again, I would use the other requirements within standard to address such a thing. I mean, I'm not sure why you'd want to put a small loop on the outside of a hood. I'm not sure of its function or purpose, but as long as it complies with the loop requirements, it should be okay.
Okay. I have a garment of nightwear for baby's top and bottom. Does the flammability label attach for both garments? This is a question from Shanjiv.
Yeah, so if it's pajamas, the UK regulations state that it must be at least in the jacket. So as long as it's at least in the jacket, that's okay. But essentially, really, it would be okay to put them in both.
A question from Ravinda. Is flammability warning required on pajamas as pajamas made of knits?
Yes.
Okay. Question from Shanjiv again. I have it's the same question. So move on to next one. A question from Natasha. Any updates regarding sequin application and size? I have covered off my sequins with mesh, but loads of garments where they are not, but a smaller sequin.
Yeah, so the only requirements on sequins are really that they shouldn't really be used on garments for babies. There's not really any requirement saying that you can't use them. And to test them for security of attachment, you just use the Part 4 durability wash.
A question from Laurel. Can you have flat metal ends on draw cords / tape, or is this a freely element?
It all would depend on the width of the draw cord or tape. So if the metal end is wider or thicker than the draw cord itself, then yes, it would be a 3D element.
A question from Mohammed. At CMR, formaldehyde, I'm sorry, I cannot pronounce this properly. Formaldehyde requirement,
yes,
75 ppm. Is it for all items, or what is the requirement for child care article?
It's for all items, but like I said earlier, it could be that a particular retailer has a lower requirement of maybe down to something like 16 ppm.
Okay, question from Nargis. Would it be needed to test women's wear pom-pom attachments for small parts or risk of choking hazard?
Technically no, because it's not children's wear, but they could test it if they wanted to.
Okay, question from Valerie. Are underwear considered as nightwear, and should it be tested for flammability?
No.
All right. A question from Anne Mary. If a strap on a bib dress is less than 3 cm wide and buttons close on the back of the garment on the outside of the garment, is this allowed?
It's difficult to answer questions like this without seeing images of the garment. So I would ask Anne-Marie if she can provide images. It would be much better for me to answer.
We lost you again, Dave.
Just saying that it's difficult to provide answers on questions like this without seeing a garment. It's very difficult.
Okay.
So ideally, if Anne-Marie wants to provide me with an image, I will try and help that way.
Okay. So the next question is Deborah from Deborah. Fixed hood versus detachable hood. Are they both allowed?
Yes. Currently, there are no requirements that say one or the other is not allowed. So yes, they are both allowed.
Okay. Question from Deborah. Again, the scenario is if a child runs into the road, the guardian grabs the hood of the coat to prevent them from running. If the hood is fixed and the child is stopped, if the hood is detachable, the child will run into the road. There are two sides of the argument.
I'm unable to comment on questions like that.
Okay. Yep. Okay, a question from Andre. For flammability, if the market is South Europe, is it compulsory?
The EN 14878 flammability standard is, like I said, a voluntary document. However, in order to sell products in Europe, whether it be South Europe or Eastern Europe, it is highly advisable to follow flammability performance requirements in that standard. If you don't follow the flammability performance standards for nightwear in that standard, how can they show that the product is safe? So yes, it is essentially compulsory, yeah.
Okay. A question from Peter. If a girl's dress is sewed together with a crossbody handbag, how to risk assess the product?
The handbag would not be assessed because it's not an item of clothing, so it's just the dress that is assessed.
Okay, a question from Katie. Are hanger loops allowed on the inner back neck of jackets for age 7 or plus?
Hanger loops are allowed on all garments, regardless of age.
Okay, and a question from Karen. Is it possible to have a summary of all questions and answers, please? As mentioned, we will try our best to answer your questions here. For those unanswered questions, we would contact you with answers separately after the webinar. Okay, and a question from from Carla. For cord ends, would attachment strength need to be tested according to DRAWSTRINGS or pull test?
So cord ends would need to be tested with a DuraWash.
Okay. A question from Fatima. Is it possible to receive the presentation as PDF file? Yes. We'll be sharing a PDF file of this presentation with all of you. And a question from Annie Marie. It's a similar question that we have answered before. We will try our best to answer all of your questions here. Okay, and a question from Emma. Is glitter considered a hazard if it sheds?
There is all I can say is that at this moment in time, it is being considered by the committee, but currently as it stands, no, because there isn't considered to be a sufficient amount of glitter that is shed to pose a hazard, but it is being considered by the committee as well.
Okay, question from Lindsay. Does hanger loops relate to belt loops?
Belt loops, hanger loops, belt loops come under the requirement for loops. So again, there just needs to be a 7.5 centimeter requirement for belt loops.
Okay. So Abby have asked that she wants information on the baby body flammability question regarding how would you define nightwear. Abby was asking that they sell baby bodies through the regular main line, but of course parents could let babies sleep in this as babies sleep almost all day. I think you've answered the question right, Dave.
Yeah.
Okay. So Abby, please let us know if you want more details for the answer. And a question from Beep Blab. In case of garment with backside brushed fabric, but with no lining, do we need to concite the face side or backside while testing?
I assume this is in relation to flammability. There's no guidance essentially on which side is tested, but so it's slightly different to the US. I think because the US side, you test if it's brushed or if it's not brushed. So it's different in the EU.
Okay. And a question from Haikal. What is the definition of loop, such as thread or any materials for baby and children products?
What is the definition of loop? Well, it would be any thread or any material that creates a loop. I'm not sure if that's the answer you're looking for.
Okay, so we would answer a few more questions. Dave, what do you think?
Yeah, keep going. Yeah.
Okay, so there's a question from Harish. For baby infants pant, can we use shoelace tipping for decorative draw cords?
Yes.
And then Harish correct her question as functional draw cord. Is the answer still the same? Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
All right. And then Manuela asked that would it be possible to have access to all questions and their answers? Okay. So Manuela, could you maybe send us emails with questions that you are particularly interested in, and then we will answer those for you on email? And next question is from Iwa, asking that durability wash test to small parts. Could you repeat the test number 17694?
It's 17394, but it's in the presentation. Hello?
you.
Hello, Rainey.
Okay, we can hear you now.
I couldn't hear anything then, sorry.
Okay, so this question from Iwa asking that, it's a question from Joanna asking that how would the security of a zip puller be assessed?
It's a pull test.
Okay, next question from Chao Sawa asking, EU regulatory drawstring and mechanical safety, will they apply in UK?
Yes, so even though the UK is no longer part of the EU, any regulations that were in place are already enshrined into UK law anyway. So yes, they all still apply in the UK.
Okay, and so far is the last question from Nargis, thanking David for your time and asking that whether you have similar webinar on US standards for children's wear that we could join.
That would be the US team.
Yes. If we have any updates from US team regarding children's wear, we'll be sure to let you all know. Okay, so far we have answered all questions. We'll give some more time. Again, if any of you have any further questions, feel free to ask on emails. We will try our best to answer them for you. Okay, still no questions. Okay, we have one more question from Harish. Is it mandatory to use warning text, keep away from fire, if the product meets BS 5722 requirement?
Okay, so for products that for products that must comply with BS 5722, such as night dresses and dressing gowns. So for those types of products, there is no mandatory requirement to use any warning text because they have to comply no matter what. So for certain products, no, it's not mandatory. For other products, such as for pajamas, for instance, then yes, you need to put keep away from fire.
Okay, any more questions? We have a question from Simono. When we call function loop when will we call a functional loop a hazard?
Again, I'm not 100% sure of the actual question, but loops should comply with all the loop requirements in EN 14682. So for fixed loops, and flat loops, there's a 7.5 centimeter requirement. And then for loops that are created by drawstrings, there's a 15 centimeter requirement circumference. So again, it's not 100% the actual question.
So Samono, if you don't mind, could you please elaborate your question? Okay, at the moment we have a question from Simon. Can we use monofilament thread for attaching sequence?
Yeah, so as it currently stands, the recommendation is that monofilament sewing thread shouldn't be used inside of a garment. There are no restrictions for using it on the outside of a garment. So yes, it can be used for attaching a sequin.
A question from Vic. Is there any restriction for infant sock, such as the floating stitching length inside or around the toe position?
Yeah, so for float stitches and other types of design like that inside or around the toe position, it's really important that they are kept to a minimum, and the requirement is 10 millimeters.
So Vic continued to ask, what about for above 3-year-old socks?
The emphasis is on obviously for very small children like babies, but it would be good manufacturing practice to apply that to all ages of children's socks.
And even leg position is the same question from Vic.
Any float stitching that's on the inside of garments should be kept to less than 10 millimeters.
So Vic asked that, is it a legal request or just nice to have?
The 16792 is a guidance document that has recommendations. So essentially, it's not a legal requirement. It's just that by following the design guidance and recommendations, you are following the best practice. In other words, 16792 is the only document in the EU that relates to these kind of practices, so it's advisable to follow.
Okay, and a question from Muhammad asking, in case of garment with backside brushed fabric but with no lining, shall we consider the face side or backside while testing?
I assume this is a flammability question. I can get back to Mohammed separately. I need some more information, so I'll contact Mohammed separately.
Okay, now we can hear you.
I need more details from Mohammed, so I'll contact him separately.
Okay. No questions so far. Just a reminder that in the PDF slides that we are going to send you an email, there will be contact information in it. So you can reach out to us with the contact information there. So there's a feedback rather than okay. So Vic asked for more explanation around 3D embellishment because Vic finds it hard to understand.
Yeah, okay, so maybe we take the discussion offline.
All right.
So if Vic needs more detailed explanation, I'm more than happy to set up a call with Vic, or we can exchange emails.
Okay. So there's a question from Tamjit asking if a care label used outside the garment and protrude fixed loop, then can we assess it as a fixed loop or not?
Okay, so if the care label is used outside the garments and protrudes like a fixed loop, then yes, essentially it should be measured and assessed as a fixed loop.
Any more questions? No problem, Carla. We hope you enjoyed this presentation. Thanks for joining, Caroline. Bye, Carla. You're welcome, Annie Marie. So we have overrun by an hour. Thank you to the rest of you for staying with us. And especially thanks to Dave Smith.
Not a problem.
It's really well done. Thanks all. Thanks for the feedback. We hope you enjoyed the presentation. Have a good day to all of you too. Yes, Vic, we might host more similar trainings in future, and we hope to see you there. Have a good day to you too, Manila. Thank you, Rebecca. I'm glad that you find it useful. Have a good day to you too, Natalie. Bye, Manila. See you next time. So, since we are running a bit late, I will do the closing now. Just a very final reminder for all our attendees. A PDF of this entire presentation, as well as a link to the recording, will be emailed to you very shortly. So if you have any questions, feel free to reach out. We'll have contact information in the PDF for you to reach out. Thank you all again for your time, especially Dave Smith. And enjoy the rest of your day. Yeah, thanks, Dave. Thanks, all of you. Goodbye. Have a good day to all of you.